Hey Chandler, welcome to the show.
Thanks, man. Great to be here.
Absolutely, it's great to have you. So for those of you listening, if you haven't met Chandler yet, Chandler Bolt is the author, the best-selling author of Book Launch, How to Write, Market, and Publish Your First Bestseller in 3 months or less, and use it to start and grow a six-figure business. He's also the founder of Self-Publishing School, one of the most successful online training programs ever created for authors. Chandler, tell us about how you got started writing your first book.
Yeah, so it was an unlikely scenario for any of those people out there who think, hey, maybe I can't do this. I was definitely one of those people because I was a C-level English student. I was someone who hated writing and wasn't any good at it. So if you were to told me, it's funny, I was just scrolling through Facebook today and you know how the time-lapse memory things pop up? It was when my first book was climbing the charts. Like, I posted a picture of it. It was 3 years ago today. And now I'm like a couple days away from releasing my sixth book. And so if you would have told me that I would have six books in the span of 3 years, I would have said, A, that sounds like a dumb idea. And B, that's not possible, right? Because I wasn't any good at writing. And so I just kind of tripped and fell into the first one. Decided to write a book about some experiences I learned while being in college. Decided to do it with a friend, and then we basically went from idea to bestseller on Amazon in 2.5 months. And then the book brought in about $7,000 in the first month. Continued to bring in like thousands of dollars every single month in passive income, which for me at the time was a really big deal. And I dropped out of school shortly thereafter, and the book paid the bills. So it kind of happened pretty quickly. And then I just took these experiences I'd learned from running a business in college while also going to school full time and just having like crazy time demands on my schedule. I took those lessons learned and put that into the book.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. So you talked about, you partnered with someone to write the book, right?
Yes.
And that you failed in English class, right? Or got a C in English class, right?
Yeah.
So who wrote the book? Like, and how did you go about that process of actually getting the content written and edited and ready for publishing?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it's always super, super confusing because my first book that I wrote was the second book that I published. So it's like whenever I say my first book, it can mean two different things. Now, the first one that I wrote, I also wrote that with someone, but I wrote that with my brother. So the process that we took for that one specifically is we wrote it in a week. So we buckled down and we wrote it in a week. And I always say, though, that when you co-author with someone, it's like imagine trying to paint a painting and then having two hands on the paintbrush, right? And then you're trying to paint, and one person's pulling one way, the other person's pulling the other way. It's actually a pretty difficult process. And for most people, I wouldn't necessarily recommend it for your first book. But we did it, didn't know any better at the time. And so me and my brother did it, and it was a crazy experience. We did it in a week. And the process that we followed is similar to the process that I teach now. It's a 3-step writing process. Okay, so the first step is you take your book idea and you put that book idea in the middle of a piece of paper. Now, the piece of paper can be a blank. It needs to be a blank sheet of paper, and it should have no lines. So we're talking like printer paper, right? So you write your book idea in that, and then you're going to do a brain dump. So you're going to dump everything onto the page, so everything you could possibly think of about this topic. So we're talking every story that you have, every lesson that you've learned, every life experience, every book that you've read, everything that you can think of. And it's going to start to look like a tree graph. It's going to go out and out and out and out. And this is the part where it's important not to filter, right? You don't filter any ideas. There's no such thing as a dumb idea. You just write it down. And it's just going to, it's going to start sparking other ideas and sparking other ideas. And then before you know it, spend 15, 30, 45 minutes. Before you know it, you'll have the basis of what turns out to be a mind map, right? Which is what you can cover in the book. So then once you have that, you start to do this mind map. And I'll encourage you, if you haven't done this yet, if you're listening to this right now, as soon as you get done with this interview, try this out. Spend 15 minutes to 30 minutes right after this interview actually mind mapping your book. So once you start to do the mind map, but what I find for most people is they'll go from, hey, I maybe have a book idea that I could possibly write 5 pages about, to they'll come back to me and they'll say, Chandler, geez, I've got 2 or 3 books that I can write. I just have to figure out which one I'm going to do first, which is a much better problem to have. So you're mind mapping. Then it's going to go branch out and out and out. Then you're going to start to look and start to organize common groups of ideas into themes or sections. Now, those will form sections. You want to have 4 to 7 sections. Then once you have kind of your sections, you're going to organize those sections in the order that you would want to represent them in a book. Then what you're going to do is drill down into those sections and try to get into chapter topics, right? So now you're working into actual chapter topics. And once you have that comes into step number 2, which is where you actually get your your chapter by chapter outline, right? So now you have an outline that you can work from. And you get that chapter by chapter outline, then you move into step number 3, which is to write the dang thing. This kind of gets to be a choose your own adventure. There's 2 paths you can go here. One path is the mind map outline right process that I just taught. You do that again, but on the chapter by chapter level. So you take your first chapter and you spend 10 minutes mind mapping everything you know about that chapter. Then you spend 10 minutes turning that mind map into a point-by-point outline. Then you spend 40 minutes going point by point and writing out the chapter in order from your outline, right? It's going to feel a little bit weird at first. This is what my brother and I did to write our book in a week. We started out about 2 hours per chapter, and we got it down to like an hour and 15 hour per chapter. So we were really humming by the end of that week. Now, the second option that you have here is you can do the mind map and the outline process, but then you can speak it. So you can, if you're like me and you speak better than you write, then you can actually follow your point-by-point outline and speak the chapter, get it transcribed. Now you have something instead of staring at that dreaded blank Word doc, right? We all know that feeling. You just want to beat your head into the keyboard. Instead of having to do that, now you have something to work with. You can massage it, or you can get an editor to come in and help you out. And I found for me that works a lot better. But it's important that you do the mind map and the outline for each chapter before speaking it. Because I've heard people recommend, just turn on the microphone and 3 hours later you're going to have a book. And it's just a piece of crap if you do that. Because you'll end up, what'll happen is you turn on the recorder on your phone, right? 30 minutes later, you're still talking and you don't know where you're at or how you got there. And then you get it transcribed and you're like, I can't work with any of this. This is trash. So you have to really kind of have a methodical process, and I promise it'll save you a ton of time.
Yeah, absolutely. You make a great point there about having that structure in place, right? Because I've had that same exact experience where I have gone and tried to record something voice note on my phone, and 5 minutes in or 25 minutes in, I'm just like, I don't even know what I'm talking about anymore.
You're like, all right, do I just
have that mind map, that outline, you can just follow along. And so if you ever do get off track, you can just go back to your outline and say, okay, now I'm here talking about point number 5 in chapter number 1. And so you can have that structure in place. And yeah, you'll still make mistakes, right? But you're not nearly as likely to make the kind of mistake where you just feel like you have to throw out the entire thing because you just completely went off track or completely forgot what you were talking about.
100% agree.
That's awesome. So how do you balance then this kind of like creativity that you have, right? Like mind mapping and, coming up with all these ideas with getting that structure in place and actually using your analytical brain to make sure that, you have good ideas, right? Not just having a lot of ideas, but actually having the good ones that are going to resonate with your market. That's
a great question. For me personally, I lean more, I would say, on the analytical side, although I don't know, I kind of bounce back and forth because I'm pretty ADD. But for me, it takes a lot of discipline, and it also takes knowing, and this is what I think trips most people up, that your mind map and your outline is fluid. So knowing at the beginning of this process, when you lock in that outline, yes, it's the way you want the book to look. But chances are you're going to get a third or half of the way through writing the book, and you say, oh, okay, I can conceptualize this more now. I know that I need to move this chapter here, et cetera. But I think when people, they get nervous, especially the super analytical types, where they're like, as soon as I lock in this outline, it's done. And so then they spend so much time actually like, oh, I don't know if this should go here, when you should actually just start writing, because you're going to write your way into that. And that's why I'm a huge proponent of setting your sights on a rough draft. I think the most important thing you can do as a first-time author is set a date that you're going to finish your rough draft, have someone hold you accountable, and then also announce your date so that you can be publicly held accountable, because that's really going to help you get your rough draft finished. And I've seen this happen time and time again for our students is once you get to that rough draft checkpoint, it's kind of like you start to see the light at the end of the tunnel. And for the first time ever, you believe that you might actually be able to make this happen. Whereas anytime before that, there's so much insecurity that's there that if you don't get to that checkpoint, then it's just an exponentially higher probability that you're going to quit before you get to the finish line.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think that's a great point. Yeah, I remember when I wrote my first book, I had so much fear and anxiety around that, right? And as a first-time author, I never realized that, the first draft is just kind of just the beginning, like you said. It's just like that checkpoint, right?
Yeah,
and I thought that by the time I had my first draft done, the book had to be done and ready and like totally edited, right? And what you're saying is like, you can be more creative. You can just get the words flowing on paper. It doesn't have to be perfect. The grammar doesn't have to be right. The spelling doesn't have to be right. Just get that first draft done, and then you can come back and edit it after that.
100%. And I'll go back to the painting analogy in this sense. And that's that. So I was talking about writing with a co-author is like having two hands on a paintbrush, and it's hard, right? So again, if we're keeping with this painting analogy, right? The same thing happens when you get a rough draft done. It's like kind of sketching out what you want on a canvas, and only then can you kind of step back and say, oh, okay, this needs a touch up here. I need to add something here. I need to, you can actually get a full picture. But when you're in the weeds creating your draft, you don't know which way's up. You don't know what's next. You're just trying to figure it out. But then once you get to the rough draft, it's like, oh, okay. Now I see I'm going to move this chapter here. I need to delete this. This sucks. I need to, you can actually start to mold the pottery or the clay that you're working with.
Absolutely. Totally agree with that. So you mentioned, your first two books you wrote with a partner, right? Your friend and then your brother. Has that been the kind of the path for you for all your books? Is that what you recommend for a lot of other folks?
Sometimes for some people, it's definitely helpful. Those first two, it was great to do it because honestly, I was probably too insecure to write them myself and to work by myself. I probably would have quit. And so it's helpful to have other people alongside me. But now my process is a little bit different. My buddy Josh Shipp, he's a speaker guy, and he has this company called Youth Speaker University, trains people in speaking, and he's a super smart guy, one of the smartest guys I know. And he was talking about the concept of creating like your signature talk and that sort of thing. And he put an interesting way. I thought this was really interesting, where he was saying that there's different types of people when it comes to creating. There's a researcher. There's like the zero to draft kind of person, and then there's the editor, right? And he says he's the editor. So he has someone on his team that does all the research. He has someone on his team that kind of like takes his ideas and then actually crafts the talk, and then he can mold it. And as soon as he said that, I was like, this makes so much more sense now, because I am that person that I have a real hard time going zero to draft because it's like staring at a blank canvas and saying, paint something. And I'm like, I don't know but I can conceptualize what I want, but I just can't always get it there. So for me now, for my last few books, I've had someone on my team where I can say, hey, let's get together. We create an outline together. And I say, hey, here's all this content that I have. Here's PDFs. Here's some videos. I'm going to record some audios for this. Here's just a bunch of content on this. And then I need you to map that and mold that into a cohesive draft. And then that's the point where I come in. So then I'm going through, I'm like, cool. No, we need some better voice here. We need an example here. We need a story here. We need a testimonial here. We need to touch on some objections, because when someone reads this, they're going to say, oh, cool. Well, that would work for Tom, but that wouldn't work for me. So I need to figure this out. And so we need to do that. And so then I can just get in there. I start typing stuff up. I start maneuvering stuff around, and that's when I can just go to town. And so that's my process now. As I still have help, but it's less of a, hey, let's write this book together. Like you write a piece, I write a piece, you write a piece. Because that's often what times when you have a co-writer, and that's pretty tough to juggle. But so it's more of a, hey, you write the book using my direction, then I'm going to really come in and take it to the finish line.
Yeah, that's a great point. And actually, that's something I've been doing the exact same thing with a lot of articles. So I've been doing tons of guest posting and guest articles recently. And so I'll take a video here or something here, and have a writer turn that into a first draft of an article.
Cool.
And then I come and pick up the editing piece of the process where I fine tune it and make it in my voice and add my ideas and links here and do all that and really fine tune that and edit it out. And then it's ready to go. And I love that process. It's so much more fun for me than starting from a blank article or going back to one of my old videos and having to listen to it again and then type it all out. I'd much rather have someone else do that. It makes the whole process so much more fun for me.
Where do you find your writers?
Just from my audience, right? So actually I sent an email out to my list a couple of months ago and was like, hey, does anyone want to write a guest article for our site? And found dozens and dozens of people submitted articles. So
they submitted. So it was basically like a tryout kind of thing, like, hey, submit an article, we'll read it, see if it's any good, and then if you're good, we'll give you a chance kind of thing.
Yeah, so the offer was actually to have folks actually post like guest posts on our site, tckpublishing.com. Yeah. And then out of them, someone did a really great job, and I followed up with them, was like, hey, you did such a great job on this article. I'd love to have you do some more work with me. But actually, my best writer right now just came from my email list as well. And I don't remember exactly how it happened, but he responded to an email. I was like, hey, I'd be happy to help out with some writing if you want to. And I was like, all right, perfect.
That's great. That's great.
Yeah. And that's one of the great things about the internet, right? Is that you can, you don't have to specialize or you don't have to do everything, right? You can find other people to partner with, people all over the world who can help you and support you, right?
And play to your strengths, which it sounds like exactly what you're doing, which I'm such a huge proponent of, because some people really love and are really good at writing. And that's all they want to do. If I try to talk to them about marketing, they're like, hey, Chandler, that's cool. You like that. I hate it. Can I just write this for you? I'm like, oh my gosh, yes, I would love that. And I'll sell the crap out of it. So yeah, I love your advice there. That's great.
Yeah, absolutely. So where have you found your team members? Because I know you've got a big team now and it's growing pretty fast. Where have you found your team members, and how did you go about that process? From early on when it was just you and a friend writing that first book, how did your team expand from there?
That's such a great question. We've dialed in a really, really good process. So our hiring process, our hiring and our recruiting process it's really good. So I read a book called Who. It's by Jeff Smart. Highly recommend it. You're nodding your head. It sounds. Have you read it?
Yeah, I know the guys, and I've read. Actually, I don't know if I've read that book, but I think they wrote another book, right?
Top Rating,
which was like way longer. Yeah,
that is a beast. So I read both of those back to back. Top Grading is a huge book on here's how you find A players, and especially here's how you interview them. And then that guy's son wrote the book Who, which is like, hey, here's the four S's of hiring. So he breaks out the whole hiring process. So its first step is creating a job scorecard. Most people don't know what they want, so they don't know if they find it because they haven't clearly defined the role. They just sit and say, oh, I need someone to take this crap that I don't want to do off my plate, like handling my email. And they just like pull stuff out of their butt and just say, oh yeah, it's going to be, but they don't actually sit down and say, okay, here's the job description. Here's the roles and responsibilities. Here's the type of person that would do this. Here's the KPIs or the key performance indicators that I'm going to hold them accountable to. Here's the outcomes that I expect with the first month and the first 3 months. I mean, when you do that, you get really clear on the type of person you need and who you need. So that's S number 1 is creating a job scorecard. S number 2 is sourcing the right candidates. And this is really a numbers game, but also a quality game as well. S number 3 is then selecting the best candidate. And then S number 4 is selling them to work for you. Because if they're a really good candidate, then chances are you're going to need to sell them on why your company, why they should leave their job. That's a whole nother thing, right? Push versus pull. If they're getting pushed out of jobs, you don't want to hire them. So if they're actually good, you're probably going to have to pull them out of a job. And so that means you're going to have to sell them on working for your company. So we've developed that process. I would love to develop that a little bit better on the writer side, actually, because as you're telling me about this whole guest post writers, we've got a couple right now, but I feel like that's an underutilized area. I mean, we've just done that for our whole staff. So that's kind of how we've developed. I'll give another answer that's on the flip side of that, is the way we were able to hire is we drove sales, which people want to ignore this. It's like the Robert Kiyosaki story, you know, where he's talking to this journalist and she says, Robert, I want to be successful like you and have this huge successful book. And so what do I need to do? What can I learn? And he said, well, you need to learn how to sell. You need to take a sales course. He's like, Robert, that's dumb. I've got a PhD. I've got this. I've got this. I'm qualified, blah, 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 right? And he tossed her a book and he said, hey, what does that say at the bottom of that book? And she's looking at it. So imagine like you're looking at the book. She's like, oh, Robert Kiyosaki. He's like, no, what does it say under that? She says, number one New York Times best-selling author. He said, right. That says best-selling author, not best writing author. He said, the difference between me and you is I'm a great salesman. And I'm a best-selling author, not a best writing author. He said, you're a great writer. You just don't know how to sell, which means you're one scale away from being where I'm at. And so that to circle back, that's why I think sales is so important. And because we focused on that, we were able to drive revenue. And if you drive revenue, then you can suddenly afford to pay people to bring onto your team. So we drove revenue so much, so we basically went from 0 to 1.32 million last year. We'll do about 2.25 this year. And about halfway through last year, we doubled our business for the year in 1 month, brought in like 330 grand in 1 month. And then we were like, oh man, finally we can afford to hire an employee. And so we hired our first employee, and then it's kind of been off to the races since then.
That's awesome. So how did you actually drive that traffic and drive those sales, right? So in terms of marketing and for authors especially, like what can they do like right now today to take their business to the next level, to take their sales to the next level?
Right now today is begin to learn psychology, persuasion, and sales. I had an epiphany point when all of my bank accounts were just hemorrhaging money and I was on the verge of going broke. And I just kind of asked myself, why is this happening? I dropped out of school and I had these visions of I'm going to drop out of school and millions of dollars are just going to flow to me. And I'm going to be the next millionaire college dropout. And this is going to be great, right? And then I'm 6 months or more later, I'm still struggling and rent is still due next month, right? And so for me, I said, why am I struggling? I said, well, it's because I can't sell and I don't know how to sell. So I really threw myself into copywriting, which is salesmanship in print. So that would be my first tip, is to learn copywriting. If you're already a writer and you enjoy writing, then you're halfway there. You just need to learn how to, when I say copywriting, again, it's salesmanship in print. So writing words that sell. So if you invest in learning that skill, I hand copied copy for an hour a day for 3 months straight. So I would take all the best sales letters and I would just type them out so that I'm kind of, by typing that out, it's not osmosis, maybe that's the word I'm looking for, but I'm just kind of getting into that mode of saying, oh, here's how you craft a headline. Here's how you get attention. Here's how you really stab the knife and twist it so that we're getting into the pain. And then here's how I present the solution to that pain. Then here's how I get them down to the path to overcome pricing objections. Here's how I add on social proof so that they know that they're not the only one and they should buy this. Here's how I add some urgency and some scarcity to close the deal. Here's, I'm learning all of these triggers. And so I hand copied copy for an hour a day. I went through John Carlton's Simple Writing System course. I read every book on copywriting that I could find. And I just devoted myself to learning sales and copywriting. That's what I would recommend. And what most people don't realize is that sales and copywriting, it's just psychology. It's all psychology. It's understanding how human beings work, how they function, what are their tics, what makes them do what they do. And learning things like it's easier to sell pain pills than it is to sell vitamins. So when you're positioning your book, you need to position it in a way that's going to solve a pain, not provide a vitamin. So for example, I want to get tactical here because I feel like I've been given some broad stroke answers. So if we're talking about, I was talking to one of our students and she had a book on avoiding burnout, or she was going to write a book on avoiding burnout. And I said, this sounds like an awesome topic. The one tweak I would make, because she was at the beginning of the process, is I would say it's what to do when you get burnout, right? Because avoiding burnout is a vitamin. What to do when you're burnout is a pain pill. Now, why does that matter? Again, it's easier to sell pain pills than it is to sell vitamins. So if you notice, pain pill companies, they don't have to do much marketing at all. But vitamins, I mean, good grief. They're chewables, they're fruity. We've got little teddy bears, we've got shapes, they'll do anything to try and sell those. And you have to just market the crap out of them, because no one just inherently wakes up and says, I need to take my vitamins today. But if they wake up and their back's hurting, they reach for the cabinet. And what are they doing is they're pulling out their credit card right away. And they say, how can I give you money? And so that's the effect that you want to have in your marketing. And it all starts with understanding psychology and how people tick. And then the last tip I'll give here is I highly recommend Influence by Robert Cialdini. It's a really great book. It's the psychology of persuasion.
Absolutely. I totally recommend that book as well. Influence is a great tool for sure. And I love what you're talking about, like the pain pill idea, right? So it's really taking, and the thing with that is it's all about your messaging, right? It's not, you don't have to change the book, right? The content of the book is exactly the same. You're just changing that you communicate what your book is about. And by making that one simple shift, you turn people from saying, oh, that's interesting, to, oh, I need that, buy that right now.
Yeah.
That's how you go from zero to a ton of sales, is by creating something that people have to have. And the thing is, like, again, it's the same exact content.
Yes.
Right? And so if you have a book that's helping people and making a difference and helping your customer, you don't have to change anything you're doing. Like, you can have a great mission. You just have to change your messaging, and that makes all the difference. I'm
so glad you said that, Tom, because so many people get hung up on that, especially product people. There's product people and then there's marketing people, right? There's people who love to create the product and there's people who love to market that product. I've found oftentimes that it's like two very distinct camps. And so oftentimes when you tell someone who's a product person that, they'll say, oh man, well, I've got to rewrite the whole book. But no, it's exactly what you said. It's the messaging. The messaging can change and the book stays the same. It's just how you represent that and how you put it across.
Absolutely. Totally agree with that. So in terms of like promotion though, so once you've got a great message for the book and you've launched your book, what are some strategies that you've found really useful for actually getting sales and driving traffic?
Totally. From a book perspective or from leading from book to business perspective?
I'd say for a book. So you just launched a new book on Amazon. Yep. How are you getting sales when you launch your books?
Yeah, so there's a bunch of things. So first off, and this is like the most non-sexy answer ever, but first off, you got to get clear on where you want to be. It's the whole Stephen Covey, begin with the end in mind. If you don't know where you're going, then you won't know how to get there. So I recommend determining your why for the book. Is that for leads? Is that to make money off of the book? Is that to drive to a back-end product? Like, what is that? Then once you get clear on that, that'll actually dictate your marketing decisions. So I'll give you an example here. So I've got a book coming out. It'll probably be out by the time this interview comes out. It's called Publish, The Proven Path from Blank Page to Published Author, right? So with this book, I know that there's two main goals. My end goal is it's mostly for leads for my business. And the secondary goal is it's an authority play. So for me, I'm not focused on how can I maximize the revenue from this book. I'm focused on how can I get the maximum number of leads for self-publishing school. And then secondly, how can I boost the authority boost my authority and self-publishing school's authority through this book. So when I'm looking at it, that's why I'm doing a lot of podcasts, guest posts, that sort of thing, because not only will that drive traffic directly to the book, that'll also drive SEO for self-publishing school. So it's a long-term move there. I'm sending a ton of these books to people for free, influencers and stuff like that. So I'm willing to incur that cost. Now, if we're getting into more tactical stuff, there's a couple things. The marketing starts before you write the book. So the positioning. So your title and your subtitle, you need to make sure that it speaks to the pain that people are experiencing. And there's a very specific benefit. For me, the litmus test is if I don't understand what your book's about within 2.5 seconds, if you tell me your title and subtitle and I don't instantly get it, then it's a bad title. So people give me a title, and if they have to give me the 5-minute backstory on what's in the book, then I'm like, it's not a good title. So it needs to be instantly clear. Your title and your subtitle, those are your salesmen, your silent salesmen, right? When people are scrolling through the Amazon store, if they see it and instantly get it, then maybe they'll click in. And so there's the whole Joe Sugarman slippery slope. This is This is a copywriting principle. So for me, I want to have the title that jumps off. That also means I need to have a good cover. That's super important. Your self-published book shouldn't look self-published. So you need to, so many people will spend a year writing a book and then 5 minutes and $5 on a cover. That's the dumbest thing you could do because people judge a book by its cover. So make sure you have a good cover. I like to put the title on the upper third. I don't often recommend that you put the title on the lower 2/3 because natural eye paths, people go to the top, then they go down, then they go, down to the right. So a lot of people, for aesthetic reasons, they put their title on the lower 2/3. That's why I say there's a difference between a good looking cover and a good selling cover. You can have a good looking cover and it cannot sell. So I put the title at the top. I make sure that the title stands out. I make sure the subtitle is very specific. Usually I'll use a group of 3. So like with book launch, I think it was how to write, market, and publish your first book in 3 months or less and use your book to grow a 6-figure business. So I'm speaking to benefits. I'm speaking to end results, not features of the book. So I'm doing that. Let's see what else. I want to make sure that I pick my categories appropriately, that I'm cross-categorizing my book so that I'm in 2 overarching categories, big categories inside Amazon. I want to drill down the categories that are a little bit less competitive so I can stay in the top 3 to 5 because the stats like 60 or 70% of books that are sold are in the top 3 to 5 and the rest just kind of fight for the scraps. I want to make sure that I'm choosing keywords because what I like to say is Google is a search engine of browsers. Amazon is a search engine of buyers. So when people come to Amazon, they're there for one reason and one reason only. That's to buy stuff. So while everyone else is focused on optimizing SEO for Google, and they have been for a decade or decades, maybe even at this point, there's a lot less competition in Amazon, but it functions the same way. You need to know, okay, what are people searching? How could they find my book? And then search the keywords that you're looking at and see what kind of competition is there. How many reviews do those books have? What's ranking at the top, right? And I'll just kind of spitfire. I realize I'm just like opening up the hose right now. But I also reviews. This is really important. Reviews weigh highly in Amazon's algorithms. So I recommend that you create a launch team for your book. We have a post on this on the Self-Publishing School blog that goes into like the details of how you can do that. It's basically a group of people that support your book. So create a launch team. The added bonus to that is you're going to get a bunch of reviews on or before your launch day. And that really helps spike things from day one. But then also it's the social proof element, right? If you were driving through a town that you've never been before, and it maybe is super small town and there was 2 restaurants, one on one side that had 5 people in it and one on the other side that it was packed. You've never been to this town before. Which restaurant are you going to go to? You're going to go to the one that's packed, right? People approach books the same way. Are you going to buy the book that has 2 reviews or are you going to buy the book that has 200? You're going to buy the book that has 200. So focus on reviews up front. One of the best pieces of advice that I got is to scrap for every review that you get. So if someone reaches out to you and says, hey, Chandler, I really like your book and I like this part and that sort of thing, I'll write back. I'll say, this is amazing. Thank you so much. Here's a link. Could you copy and paste what you just said into an Amazon review? Right? I'm scrapping for every review that I can get. And then I'm using a review sweeper. This is what I call the review sweeper. Okay, this is, I'm going long here, Tom. You can cut me off, but I'll say this last thing real quick. So the review sweeper, this basically means that anyone who downloads my book, either buys it through me, downloads the audiobook, downloads a PDF or anything through me, I'm going to set up a sequence where about 3 weeks later, they're going to get a series of emails. The first one says, hey, what do you think of my book? Do you like it? Do you hate it? What do you think? Hit reply to this email right now and let me know. Now then, my support team, when people respond positively to that, we've got a macro or like a canned response kind of thing, which is like, hey, thank you so much. They'll add in some personal stuff and then they'll say, hey, could you copy and paste that into a review? Right? So I call that a review sweeper because that's just going to keep sweeping in reviews for weeks and weeks and weeks to come. Then there will be a couple more follow-up emails that come after that that are just, hey, can you leave a review? And it'll give a direct link. And then the last one will say, hey, this is the last time I'm going to bug you about this. If you could leave me a review, it'd be a huge help. If not, no worries.
That's awesome. That's so much great information, Chandler. Thank you for sharing that.
No problem.
Yeah, awesome. So this has been such a great interview, man. I've had a ton of fun with you and learned a lot as well. Really appreciate it. And before you go, can you tell us more if we can find out more about you and your new book and what you're working on?
Totally. Yeah. So we put out a bunch of free content on the whole writing, marketing, publishing process over at self-publishingschool.com on the Self-Publishing School blog. And then also, if you want to check out the new book, it's called Published, The Proven Path from Blank Page to Published Author. Just launched. It's on Amazon, or we've got some free copies available at self-publishingschool.com/published.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Chandler. Really appreciate it.
Tom, thanks so much for having me, man. Great to be here.